You.
Same here. Oh,
Great.
virtually meeting again.
Yes, yes. Here we go. How's everything going?
Oh, everything's peachy keen here, except next door, our neighbor's having a new roof put on. So you may hear a little hammering here and there.
Okay, it's so funny you say that because out on the street here in New York, there's some kind of drilling going on every so often. So I've locked everything down, but let me know if it's too much and I'll put on headphones.
Right.
Between the two of us.
I'm sure that's nothing new in New York City.
No, no. There's always something interesting going on out there.
For sure. We love New York City. We try to get there every year and take in a few plays and eat a lot.
Yes. Oh, it's great. And there's a lot going on now. It's nice. It really feels like it's back and running.
How long have you lived there?
I think it's 35 years now.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Wow.
right after college, I came here and just never
I
went
thought you
back.
came, you must have been about 10 years old.
No, no, no. It was, yeah, it's so funny, when I realized how long it's been.
Yeah, that's great. And I understand you first came, you were an actress.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And did that for about 10 years, which was a lot of fun. And some of my friends are still doing it, which is great. But
So,
yeah,
what kind of success did you have?
I did, and feel free to ask this during the talk too.
Okay.
Yeah, I did Broadway and off Broadway and regional theater,
Ah,
which
that's
was
true.
a lot of fun. Yeah, a lot of not musicals, but more straight plays.
That's great.
Yeah.
And I know you've done a lot of these interviews. Once I ask a question, please feel free to carry on. So I've got like a dozen or so questions all
Wonderful.
typed out. So
Oh no,
it'll
that
be
sounds
fun. The
that sounds
hour is just going
great.
to fly by.
I know it always does, isn't it? It's so amazing, isn't it? Did you do the other ones as well, the earlier ones?
No, actually, I was recruited for this. The assistant librarian that had done the others and is no longer at the library.
Uh,
So Kim, the manager, came to me, and because we had been working on another event, I'm a writer of very little note.
ah,
It's outside of my household, my wife calls me a legend in my own mind. But
what do you write? What do you write?
I've written 6 novels, and then about 7 years ago, I turned to writing, working with individuals. So I write their biographies,
Oh,
memoirs.
fantastic.
So history is really important to me, and that's what I loved about your book is the history part of it.
Oh, thank you. And I see you have it behind you. Thank you so much. That's
You're welcome.
love that.
That's a little less awkward than keep holding it up.
I love that you write biographies. It's almost like doing ghostwriting, in a way.
Right. Some of it is ghostwriting, and some of it I get a co-author credit.
Yeah.
I've written, and they're all, for the most part, are people in this region.
Mhm.
And a couple of the people I knew personally, and they're typically elderly, wealthy men. And they feel they have a story to tell. They have a legacy they want to hold on to and pass along to their families. So it's been fascinating, really. You feel like you're in a master's class because
Oh,
I
yeah.
worked with an international economist, a golf pro, a professional jazz musician. So,
I love it. It's
yeah,
a story in itself, actually. Like that's fascinating.
so anyway, that's part of my story.
I
But
love it.
you
Do they
and
tell you the good and the bad, or do they just tell you the good?
for the most part, they like to put a shine on their lives. But typically, I do about a dozen interviews with them and family and friends. So we dig into it, and some of them have gotten down pretty nitty gritty. One of them's talked about a really bad divorce, and another about losing 2 children, and
Oh,
so you get to feel the
wow.
intimacy and the pain, and as well as the joys of all of this.
Wow. Wow. I find that really fascinating, actually. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Oh,
Um, we're I thought somebody else was going to be on there. Trin is, I guess, monitoring all this.
yes.
And so she will be allowing the people in as they check in. And I have no idea how many people signed up for this. Last time I checked, which was more than a week ago, there were about 45 or 50. So we've
Oh,
probably added to that.
Okay, great. Did the ones go earlier this year? You had some really fun people I saw.
Actually, I don't know.
Okay.
Like I said, I was recruited
You recruited
and
later
I,
on, yeah, yeah.
she did send me a link to the last one, I believe, but I never got a chance to read it. I've been working on somebody else's book and trying to get that finished. So I was right down to the minute. I did read your book. I'll say
Oh,
that.
hey, that's all you got to do. You know, not
Yeah.
even. You could just read the back flap. We could still wing it.
Right, right. And also, they asked me to lead the book club, which discussed it last week.
Oh,
Um,
great.
and so I'll have a few questions that they asked me to ask you.
Great. Perfect. And I see Trin says there's about 70 people signed up. So that's a
Oh,
nice.
terrific, terrific.
I mean, there tends to be drop off the day of,
Right.
but, things come up, but that sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your deadline to finish this latest book?
Well, actually, it's a long deadline. This is another one of those books he wanted for family and friends. And he said, I just want to have it by Christmas so I can give it away as a gift. But we'll probably have this done within a month to 6 weeks from now, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Christmas will be here before we know it, actually.
All right, for
Amazing.
sure. Time is flying, isn't it?
Yeah. Is it boiling down there or is it okay?
Let's see, it's 89 right now, but we've had 94, 95-degree days.
Yeah.
We live within 2 miles of the beach, so my wife and I will go to the beach and walk 3 miles a couple of times a week. And we were walking every single day, if not at the beach here in the neighborhood. But once it got so hot, I got a little lazy, and
Yeah.
I do manage to get to our local Y and try
Okay.
to stay in shape. So,
Yeah. It's asking a lot.
how
It's
about in
that
New
warm.
York? Is it hot?
No, it's in the 60s today. It's
No
chilly.
kidding, really?
Yeah. And we've had a really temperate summer. It's, we get beautiful days and then crazy thunderstorms. But it's not been really hot. The grass, I have a house just north of the city, and normally this time of year, the grass is pretty yellow and dry. It is green like we're in Ireland because we've had so
Wow.
much rain. It's amazing.
I'm gonna try it. I've got this, try to get full screen here. Let me see. What time is it? Oh, 5 more minutes.
Yeah. And she
Full
just said
screen.
she'll be
There we
letting
go.
in everyone at 3 o'clock.
Right.
Do people put their questions in the chat usually, or?
I'm not sure. Perhaps we can check that out. Let's see what's in there.
Yeah, I'm just
I don't see anything.
I am in the chat. I see there's library and Trin's she sent you a note just saying that there's 70 people.
Okay. We've got looks like 15 signed on right now.
Oh, great.
When did the spectacular release?
It came out, gosh, I'm blanking, June 7th. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
June 7th. So it's been a couple months now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is 4 or 5 months and you're still doing promotion and
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
going to continue through the end of the year?
Yeah, it's been really busy. I find that I can keep the ball rolling. Just because there's now a backlist that people, if they read one, they might go back and read the other. So you're kind of building an audience in a really wonderful way. And so, yeah, I'm going to North Carolina next month and a few things around here. It's keeping me busy, which is, when you're writing the next book is a little tricky, but I kind of want to keep the ball rolling and do what I can.
You're not one of those authors that puts out a book every single year.
No, but I am a year and a half, so
okay.
almost. But I always would say, I don't have kids, so that makes a big difference in terms of being able to just write.
Right. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
We're okay. 3 more minutes.
Yeah. Let me see if Trin answers. Trin, with the questions from the audience, will they be coming from you or?
Yeah, it'll come from me. I wrote them
okay.
and I'll mix them in as we get closer to the end.
Got it.
One of them basically is they want to know about your process of writing. Another one had a question, and I won't do a spoiler on this, but they wondered why you killed off Judy when the bomber didn't kill anybody. But
Right. That's a
I
good.
understand from a writer's point of view probably why you did that. But
Yeah. That's a good question, actually. Should we do spoilers or no?
well, I was
Since-
going to frame it in that you killed off a character,
Yeah.
rather than mention who it was.
Perfect.
But,
Yes.
anyway, and the other question was about changing the names of people and the Con Ed and that
Yes.
sort of thing. And they want to know, was this because of a legal issue or?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a good question. And you know what? Trin in the chat says that there'll be some questions in the chat as well.
Oh, okay, good.
Just
Good.
wrote that. So I can keep an eye on that, or if you see
All
it,
right.
you know, we can follow that along.
Okay, because I'm not sure, how do I get those? I
If you
see
go
it
right
says,
at the bottom, it says chat.
yeah, and it says show chat preview. Oh, preview, not
Just hit that thing. It should do it.
Oh, okay, I got it.
You see
Right.
that? It just pulls it
Yeah,
right up.
I see. All right. Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, those are good questions. That'll be fun.
Yep. Well, after I make our big introduction, I'll just ask you to tell us a little bit about the book, and then we'll move from there.
Perfect. I can tell you've done this before. Oh, great.
A little frog in my throat, so bear with me.
Yes, no worries. A singer friend of mine gave me a vocal warm-up that I do, especially before like a talk before an audience, and it makes such a difference.
Really?
Yeah, it takes a minute, but it's just enough because I was losing my voice.
Wow.
Yeah. Talk enough, that'll happen. Great.
All right. Not sure how we know when we're on.
I think she'll probably tell us.
Okay.
I'm keeping an eye on the chat. We're on.
Okay.
Wow.
Welcome, everyone. You are here with Conversations for an Author, to an Author. And I'm Vic DeGenti. I'm going to be leading this interview with none other than Fiona Davis today. I am a former member of the board of the Friends of the Library at Ponte Vedra Beach, and Ponte Vedra Beach branch library, the ones that are bringing you today's Conversations with the Author. And we welcome all of you here. We're so delighted to have you with us, Fiona.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here, and thanks everybody for joining in. This is terrific.
And those of you joining in, I'm sure you know that Fiona is the author of best-selling historical thrillers, if you will, or novels anyway, that are based on his iconic New York City buildings. And the one that we're going to be discussing today, The Spectacular, is, of course, based on New York City's Radio City Music Hall and the Rockettes. And well, if you've ever been to a show and see the Rockettes, you know it's spectacular. And you've done a fantastic job. I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book, Fiona. So before we dive into deeper waters, why don't you just tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Vic. Thanks so much for doing this. I'm really thrilled to be here. Yeah, so the book is set at Radio City Music Hall in the 1950s. And it's from the point of view of a character named Marion. And she's a dancer. She wants to be a Rockette. And she goes against her father's wishes in order to audition, and she gets in. And then in terms of what's going on in the story, for very personal reasons, she gets caught up in the hunt for someone known as the Big Apple Bomber, who's based on a real bomber who terrorized New York for 16 years. And because of that, she teams up with a very introverted yet brilliant psychiatrist named Peter to try and figure out who this person is. And, you know, it's a bit of a thriller. It's a bit of a romance. It's very much historical fiction. And it really provides a glamorous look at what goes on behind the scenes at Radio City Music Hall.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons I love the book is because it combined my two favorite subjects, history and mystery. and I love the way you melded history with the story. Looking at personally your life, I understand you came to New York City. You were telling me 35 years ago, and you were an actress. Tell me about your career as an actress.
Yeah, sure. You know, I've gone through a few careers before I hit on this one, which I am having a great time with. But yeah, I came to New York as an actress, and I worked on Broadway and off Broadway in regional theater. I'm 5'10", so if you saw a production of Three Tall Women back then, it was probably me. It was a lot of fun. I worked with friends. We created a theater company. We put on a lot of shows. One of them went to Broadway and was nominated for a Tony Award. It was just a really, really exciting time. And, you know, I just love the collaboration of the theater, and I love plays. I love reading plays. And I really think that informed me later as an author because, you know, plays are all dialogue and there's nothing else. And so it kind of got me thinking about how things are worded and what is the structure of a story. And as I got a little older into my early 30s, I noticed that all of my girlfriends who were actresses were having a hard time getting roles. And all of my friends who were men were aging into really great character roles. And this was in the 90s. And I just thought, you know, that's not quite right. And so at that point, I went to NYU Career Services to get a Briggs-Myers test. Do you remember those?
Mm-hmm.
And just to see, okay, what else should I, you know, what does this test tell me I should be? And it said you should either be a journalist or a policeman. and I thought, there's no way I could be a policeman in New York City. And so that's when I applied to Columbia Journalism School and got in. And that kind of really pointed me in the direction of writing, although at that point it was only nonfiction.
You earned a master's degree in journalism. Did you ever work as a journalist?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When I got out, I worked for Channel 13 here, which is our local PBS channel. And then I worked for a magazine, a theater magazine, actually. And after that, I started freelancing and I wrote for Oprah magazine and Women's Health and a lot about health and wellness and culture. Whenever I could, I'd, you know, try and get an article about theater or something like that in there.
Then there must have come an aha moment when you decided, well, maybe I can actually write a book. And we know, as I mentioned in the introduction, you've structured your books around iconic New York City buildings. And your first one was the Barbizon Hotel, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Were you thinking at the time that this could be a series, or was that a one-off in your mind?
You know, I was very much living in the moment. And I remember I got an idea for a journalistic story about the older ladies who live at the Barbizon Hotel after it went condo and how they were moved into these kind of rent-controlled apartments on the 4th floor. So they lived in the studio with the kitchenette. And meanwhile, there's a guy in the penthouse who paid $17 million for his. And I just thought, what an interesting clash, right? This is old and new New York. The buildings changed, the residents have changed, the city has changed, and what a great article. But at that time, the women of the 4th floor were very private and they didn't want to be interviewed. And it's one of those things I just couldn't shake. And I just started thinking, well, this would be a great book. I'd love to read that book. And that's where I first thought, well, maybe I could write it, because before then I could never imagine writing a book. But at that point, I was in my late 40s and just thinking, you know, I need something meaty to play with. And so I kind of figured out how to write a book by studying other dual timeline mystery, historical fiction books, by really, you know, throwing myself into how is this done, and taking, you know, courses on writing short stories. And that's what ended up being The Dollhouse, my first book. And that was all I could handle at that point. I couldn't imagine writing more. But you know, it just slowly developed. And I always say, I highly recommend changing your career every 10 years or so, because I've had 3 careers and each one kind of pointed me slowly in the direction of where I wanted to be. And I didn't know it at the time.
Once you completed that manuscript, how long before you landed an agent?
You know, I was working on it, and I was going to things like writers' conferences just to learn what I could about the industry, because it's so different from nonfiction. And I remember going to a panel and hearing an agent talk about that she was looking for certain kinds of books and certain kind of characters. And I remember thinking, oh, she sounds great. And so once it was ready, I emailed her and said, you know, I saw you at this panel and here's what you said and here's what I've written. And I think that was just enough to get me noticed out of that slush pile that everybody talks about. And so she called me and said, you know, I love this manuscript. And I have a great title for it, because at that point I didn't really have a title. And she said, but I'm not going to tell you unless you sign with me. And I did, and it was the best decision I could ever made. She's just terrific. She's been with me through all the books and is, you know, she's just, I really lucked out in that way. So that took about you know, a couple years, I'd say, before I landed her.
And did she have the right title?
Yes, it was called The Dollhouse. That was her idea. And it was because that's what the Barbizon was kind of known for. And
Yeah.
she discovered it. So yeah, it was just great. And, you know, keep in mind, after that, we edited it like crazy because I didn't know what I didn't know. You know, this was my first book. There was so much I didn't know. And she was very patient with me and kind of led me through it until it was ready to present to editors.
I've been a member of the Florida Writers Association for about 20 years now, and I lead some writing workshops, et cetera. And because it's so easy to become a published author these days, a lot of people think you sit down and write the book and put it on Amazon. They don't realize that it's not a book until you've revised it 10 times, you know, and rewritten it. You got to put your heart and soul into it.
That is so true. I can tell you understand that, because, you know, you write that first draft and you're kind of on a high because you've finished a draft of a book, which is a huge accomplishment, by the way. I mean, most people don't get that far. So if you can, you know, get through beginning, middle, and end, it's amazing. But after that, yeah, I remember thinking, oh, this is fantastic, and sending it off to a friend of mine who was an editor, and realizing, no, I have a long way to go. And every book I do about 10 rounds of revisions after that first draft.
Sure. I know authors are often asked where they get their ideas. I think it was Stephen King that once quipped that there's a special section in eBay where he bought his ideas. But actually, you have a pretty good story about how you got the idea for the spectacular. Tell us about that.
Yeah. You know, each book, as you said, is set in an iconic building here in New York. And as I was finishing up my last book, which was set at the Frick Collection, I started, you know, just starting to think about ideas. I don't have a file of buildings or anything. I really try and live in the moment. And right then I got an email through my author website. And it was from a woman. She said, I'm in my 80s. I'm a former Rockette. And if you want to know all about the secrets of Radio City Music Hall, you should call me. And I thought, wow, that's a gift right there. And so I reached out to her, and she had so many great memories. And she danced there when she was 19. She met her husband there because he did the lighting board. They were both 19. They've been married ever since. And we had this great conversation. And on top of that, she'd kept a lot of materials. So she had the schedule, you know, she had programs, she had photographs, and she very kindly FedExed them to me so I could use them as archival material as I was researching. And so it was just amazing. And what was really wonderful about Sandy is that the very first book event that I did was down in New Jersey, which is where she lives now. And she came. And so she was sitting in the front row with her family. It was the first time we'd met, and she answered some questions. And then after, I was, you know, in the lobby signing books at a table, and I looked up and they'd set up a table for her, and she was signing away. And I just thought, that is just perfect, because it really was a collaboration. And her husband was very helpful as well in terms of all the technical information that I needed to know about Radio City and how it's changed over the years. And
even if we've attended a Rockette show, which my wife and I did, the Christmas show about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was spectacular. You just don't really get the feeling of how much goes into the entertainment and also what's in that building. And you do a great job describing everything in Radio City Music Hall that we had no idea about.
It's fun because, in the 1950s, it was so different. Here, these days, the Rockettes, it's a part-time job. They do it really just over Christmas. But back then in the 50s, you did 4 shows a day, 3 or 4 weeks straight, and then you got a week off. And then you'd go back in. And so you were constantly dancing. It required enormous discipline and technique and strength. They did around 600 kicks per day there. And it was all in because that was when they were showing movies. And Radio City was a movie palace. And so they'd show a movie, and then you could, if you had a ticket, you could stay for the show. And that had the Rockettes, it had a choral society. There was the Radio City Ballet Corps, believe it or not. And they'd all perform. And so there was so much going on backstage that they had a dormitory for when they had to stay over. They had a nurse on staff. They had a cafeteria. They had dressing rooms, rehearsal halls. And then up on the roof, they had shuffleball and wiffle ball courts, so they could go up there and hang out, which I apparently really delighted all the workers in the skyscrapers around them, as you can imagine.
Oh, bad. So you obviously did a tremendous amount of research. How much of that, how long did it take you? A year and a half to write this? How much of the total process goes into the research?
Yeah, the research for me these days takes about 3 or 4 months. And I always say, and I mentioned this to you before, I don't have kids, so I have all the time in the world to play with these books, which is really, really what I love. And so, yeah, what I do is I really do a deep dive, and I interviewed a number of Rockettes who danced there in the 40s, 50s, 60s to see what it was like back then. A few of the more current Rockettes, and then just learning everything I could about the time period, about the building, about, where did the Rockettes stay? This really cool place called the Rehearsal Club. Like, I learned so many fun things that then I have a yellow legal notepad, and I just keep notes as I'm researching. And the things that make the hair on the back of my neck stand up, I know I should probably include in the plot or a character. And so after about 3 or 4 months, I reach a tipping point where I feel like it's there, and I usually get the idea for the first line of the book. And then I'm really off to the races in terms of outlining and then starting that first draft.
Was there anything that really jumped out at you that surprised you when you were doing your research?
Yeah, it's such a great question. What really surprised me was the sisterhood that evolved among the Rockettes. They were together so much. And the way they talked about it, especially the women who were there in the 40s and 50s and 60s, where women were supposed to be nurses or teachers or wives. And there they were dancing at Radio City, independent, making their own money. And they just spoke about it as the best time in their lives. There was one who mentioned that her favorite memory was walking down the middle of Fifth Avenue at midnight, arm in arm with her fellow Rockettes, just singing at the top of their lungs. And it's just one of those things that to capture that and try and capture that on the page became very important to me. And I would say to them, I'd say, okay, what's the real truth? What, was there much backstabbing, fighting over guys, anything like that? And they all said no. It was a really warm, sheltered, safe environment where they could be individuals and do what they love doing, which is dancing.
And they were treated quite well, weren't they? Well, by the director there.
Yeah, Russell Marker, who is a character in the book. He was just a really good guy, and he founded them back in 1925 in St. Louis. That's where they began. And he went with the troupe as they came to New York and worked on Broadway. And they changed names from being the Missouri Rockets to the Roxyettes, and then finally the Rockettes. And they were there at opening night at Radio City. It's just a wonderful. He was with them until he retired in 1971. And everyone just spoke so highly of him. And also he had an assistant, Emily, and I included her as well because she was kind of the disciplinarian and would keep the technique right and make sure people were doing what they should be doing. And I just recently through my email got an email from her son and her daughter, And they said, oh, you really captured her well, to the point of the charm bracelets that she would wear, that people could hear her coming because they'd, and I just thought, isn't that wonderful, you know? In fact, I think Henry, yes, Henry's here, right? You wrote to me. Is that right? Oh, he's muted.
Wave your hand, Henry.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
my
I'm
goodness.
here. I'm here, and my sister Arnell is here as well.
Oh, how wonderful. You made my day. Oh, sorry, you guys. You see me live getting a little teary. Oh, it was really wonderful of you to do that. And I love that you're here. That's fantastic.
Well, you know, even though she was a minor character, you really captured her in the book. You know, that detail of the jangly bracelet, you know, but also the perfectionism and so forth. That was her. So I really want to commend you for your research and for personally bringing her to life.
Oh, thank you. Oh my goodness, this is just an absolute delight. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's the thing. It was a real group effort for the Rockettes. Everybody did their part. And so it was very, very fun to capture that, because it was so different back then for women and for a Rockette. And so to bring that to life was just a complete honor.
I know that really makes you feel good when you have that kind of feedback from a reader or someone.
And also,
played a big
Fiona?
part. Right.
Yeah.
Hi, Fiona, this is Arnell.
Oh, hi. Yes.
Hi.
Oh,
I don't have the picture up, but yes. I was just, thinking about things. We lived 4 blocks from Radio City. We were brought up right there. And I spent a lot of time in the dressing rooms with the girls. And as I mentioned in my email, Russell was my godfather.
yeah.
My middle name was Russell because of him. And of course, Beulah was, there doing her thing on the piano. And I remember going to rehearsals. My mother quipped one day to me, she said, if you kept up your dancing, you could have been a summer replacement. And I said, I really honestly don't think I would have wanted to work under my mother.
No.
I went to enough dress rehearsals, and I remember cringing in my seat because, yes, she was a taskmaster. And really, and a couple times sitting up first row, center mezzanine, first mezzanine, if she had to be backstage or someplace else, I felt myself starting to look and say, okay, who's out of place? So it was really quite funny. It was, but it was great. I enjoyed reading it so much because it brought back so many memories.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining in. Yeah, that was the really fun thing of talking to, people who were around then, because it was a really special time.
Yeah.
It's one of the things we learned was how demanding and stressful it must have been for these young girls. And you portrayed that quite well.
Yeah, there were a lot of rules where they couldn't get tans or they couldn't get sunburns or tans. They had to keep their hair the same. Their weight had to remain the same. But at the same time, I learned all these funny little things like, the toy soldiers outfits that they wear. Those pants, and apparently in the 40s and 50s, they were so starched that they'd have to stand on a chair and slide into them. And, or there was one that a dancer told me about how the last conductor of the night doing the last show of the night would speed up so he could make his train on time. And so they'd have to dance faster and faster. And those are the kind of details I'm looking for, Vic, because you're looking for that thing that can really get the reader in the scene easily.
Sure.
And make them feel like they're part of something that's really alive without having to describe, what they're wearing for 8 pages or what the room looks like for 6 pages, which really no one wants.
Sure. And I know that in each of your books, you're looking for something very dramatic that actually happened, a historic event. And you found that with the Mad Bomber.
Yeah. With each book, I try and find a hook that will really anchor the reader in the time period. And so for this one, I was looking to what was happening in the 50s in New York. And it mentioned that in 1956, at the end of the year, the police were really ramping up their hunt for what they called the Mad Bomber. And he was this guy who had, over 16 years, set 33 bombs in iconic New York City buildings, including, the New York Public Library, Penn Station, Grand Central. He set 2 at Radio City Music Hall. And that really caught my attention. And then I learned that he was caught using criminal profiling for the first time. And that the police were so, lost as to how to find this guy, that they sent all of his letters, they gave all of his letters that he'd written over the years to a psychiatrist at Creedmoor State Hospital in Queens, a guy named James Brussel. And he looked through all the letters and studied them. And he came back to the police and he said, okay, here's your guy. He'll be 40 to 50 years old, medium to tall height. He'll be very methodical, clean shaven. He'll be living with an older female relative. He won't be married. He will be from Eastern Europe. He'll be Roman Catholic. And finally, he said, when you find him, he'll be wearing a double-breasted suit and it will be buttoned. And without giving anything away, the science of criminal profiling was born. And the minute I saw that, I thought that could be really fun to incorporate. And I haven't really done a thriller element in a book before, but I just started thinking about what this could be. And it really grew out of that.
Well, after you've finished all your research and you've got your major plot points, then you have to sit down, incorporate your characters and conflict and a lot of page-turning drama to keep the reader engaged. Is that part of the process more difficult for you or less difficult?
At first it was more difficult. I would have ideas for characters, but plot really threw me early on. And it took me a while to figure out how to plot a book. And I just read as much as I could about it and studied what other people did. And so what I do is I figure out who the characters will be and who they are, what they want, and then what kind of obstacles could get in their way, because you certainly don't want someone in a book leading a really happy life and living happily ever after, because that's no tension whatsoever. And so all of my books have some kind of a plot twist. There's a mystery involved. And so, you're kind of driving, if it's sometimes 2 timelines, driving towards figuring out what really happened. And it's just a fun way to do it. So what I do is once I have these characters, I plotted out each timeline. And for some of my books, there's 2 very extensive timelines. This one, not so much. I wanted to mainly stay in the 1950s with just a little bit of a Rockette looking back on her life from later on. And so what I do is I figure out the outline of each timeline, and then I very carefully weave them together and see what holds up. And those are usually the 2 weeks that I'm drinking a lot of wine at night, because it is so hard to make 2 timelines flow together and not have, a problem solved with a phone call in the later timeline, which ruins everything in the old one. You'll find that most of my books are set before cell phones because we need missed connections. We need things like that to keep the story rolling. But once I have that outline, it's really a roadmap for me. And I tend to do the older timeline first and then the more modern one. And then again, there's about 10 revisions after that. But, my parents are both engineers. And so it's important for me to have a roadmap. I have friends who are authors who sit down and just see where the story takes them, but I could never do that. I would just go and eat things from my refrigerator all day because, I would be stymied. But here, the way I do it, it's so that if I'm working in a scene and it's not quite working and it's just not a good writing day, which happens to everybody, I'm excited for the chapter that's coming up probably. And so I'll get through it in order to be able to write that chapter because I know what's going to be happening.
Yeah, that's the ongoing battle between the outliners and the pantsers, people that sit right by the seat of their pants.
Yes, yes.
And I started out a little bit more of a pantser, and now I'm pretty much a hybrid.
Yes. Yeah. And, I've become a bit more of a hybrid because I used to really know everything. And now I let the endings be a little open. I let, and the book I'm working on right now, it's really fun to let things kind of not be solved right away so that as the book progresses, I can hopefully organically incorporate what naturally needs to happen.
And in your two timelines, I was interested in Marion's as a young person was in past tense, and the older Marion was in present tense. I'm sure that was a deliberate choice.
Yeah, you know, I knew the older Marion wouldn't be as much in the book. She's about 5 chapters, I'd say, total.
Mhm.
And so I needed a way to really get the reader to connect with her quickly. And also she's going through a lot and she's not exactly in a good place.
Right.
And so I wanted to make sure I didn't alienate the reader. And by using the I, for me, when I'm reading that, it feels like I'm right in their mind. Whereas third person, you feel like you're watching them do
Sure.
something sometimes. So yeah, that was my way to hopefully hook people in.
Right. You did a good job, Fiona, of spotlighting the issues for women back in that era, and with Marion and her father and her sister and throwing up roadblocks, and she had all this inner conflict of what she should do. I like the way that all worked out.
Yeah, that was, you know, interesting to write. And the idea for having the father disapprove really came from talking to Rockettes, who many of them, you know, that they really did it against their parents' wishes because it was considered just, you know, outlandish. Which today we look and we think it's crazy. Your daughter could be a Rockette. You know, why wouldn't you want to applaud her? But it was just so different back then. And yeah, you know, with something like this, it's fun to throw up roadblocks and have, you know, a chase through Radio City. It was a real delight to work on, I have to say.
Yeah. And her father, Simon, who I thought was aptly named. I thought of Simon Legree when I was reading this. And he turned out to be almost a bit of an antagonist as this story went along. Did you want him to be that kind of a stern character?
I did. I wanted the family's past to be a little murky,
Mhm.
because a lot of what Marion goes through is learning who her mother was, and her mother passed away when she was young, but learning who this woman was as a mother, as someone who wanted to also be in the creative arts. And so, you know, with Simon, he's hiding some things. And, you know, it gives her a journey to figure out the truth of who her mother was, while at the same time figuring out who she is, which is, you know, all part of that. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot for her to, she gets a lot thrown at her in this book, poor thing. Oh, and by the way, I can see people are asking a couple questions in the chat. Feel free to throw your questions there and we'll definitely get to them.
Let's see what we have.
One is, what building is featured in the next book, which I'm sure was on your list anyway, Vic.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. Great.
Okay, they love your book. Excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're the only one so far.
Okay. Yes. We'll get to your next book soon. Tell me about Marion and Peter's relationship, how that seemed to grow from her first meeting when she double dated, I guess, with Bunny and her beau, part-time beau over there, and it certainly changed as the book went along.
Yeah, you know, I like the idea that they're a very mismatched couple in many ways. Marion is very outgoing, you know, she's a Rockette who's almost too big to be a Rockette. She just is bigger than life. And that's actually based on the actress Vera Ellen, who as a young girl was a Rockette. And she just couldn't quite fit in. She, you know, her kicks would be eye height when they're supposed to be shoulder height. And Russell Markert finally gave her a couple weeks to get it together, and she quit before she got fired, and then went on to a great career doing White Christmas and all kinds of things. But I was really intrigued by that idea of a woman who's just, her individuality just, you know, is out there.
Right.
You know, she's just bigger than life. And so by contrast, by making Peter very introverted, very smart, but not really a social gadfly, it was kind of a fun way to get this odd couple together, because together they have to figure out what's happened and who this guy is and try and track him down. And so it made for a fun team who you wouldn't expect would actually fall in love and end up doing.
For a while there, I was thinking about Holmes and Watson and this pairing, and the two as they went on the hunt. And it was funny the way they were, the way the two police officers would rebuff them, especially the one wanted nothing to do with them.
Yeah, right.
Because a good cop and the bad cop, right?
Yes, right. So classic, exactly. Because for them it's a rocket, saying she can help. That to them, especially at that time, it was like, no, little girl, off you go. Don't bother us. We're working, and so she really has to work hard to try and get their attention.
Yeah, for sure. I was fortunate to lead our book club. Any book club members out there? Last week we discussed your book, and a couple of them had a few questions they wanted to ask me, and you kind of got into one of these. They were asking about your process of writing. What time of the day do you write? How long do you write? Do you write by longhand or computer? Why don't you detail some of that for us?
Yeah, sure. So it depends where I am in the process. If I'm writing that first draft, I tend to need to work in the morning because my brain is just better then. And when you are dealing with a blank page, it just takes so much out of you. So I'll do about 2 or 3 hours a day, and that's all I can do. But if you do that enough, after 3 or 4 months, you end up with a first draft. If I'm editing, then I can pretty much do it anytime. I love to edit. I love to have that raw material on the page and then be able to massage a sentence so that it finally works. There's something, it's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together. When you make a story flow and you start feeling the rhythm and you start feeling like, okay, now it's working. Now it's starting to sing. And so I can do that pretty much anytime. I tend to work, I'm here in New York. I have an office, a home office that I work out of. And if I kind of look over that way and stick my head out, I can see the Hudson River. So that's always nice. I think there's something wonderful about having water nearby.
Sure.
You're working, right? There's something to it.
Absolutely. A lot of writers will tell you to get that first draft out as quickly as possible and not bother with it until you're finished. Do you do a little editing as you go along?
I used to just go right through, but I found with this last book that I'm working on, it worked out better to write a chapter, which takes about a week, and then to do a light edit of it and just get all the really annoying stuff so it's clear at least. And that's pushed me further ahead in the schedule, which is really nice because it is in better shape than it otherwise would be. So yeah, I do tend to do just light editing after each chapter, but I don't belabor the point. I don't try and make it perfect because I know, especially with a mystery, you need to go back and tweak things so that, a character becomes more of this or more of that. And you have to go and change things as you go back and to make that storyline work. So I know there's going to be edits, so I don't get married to the material right away.
One of the other book club members wanted to know why you changed names of some of the characters from the original character, and you also changed the name of the power company, the electric company as well.
Yeah. It was carefully read by the legal department at Dutton, where's my publisher. And just for certain reasons, they needed to change things. So we changed the name of the power company. We changed the name of the bomber from the Mad Bomber to the Big Apple Bomber, and just things to. In fact, I think I did that right away because I knew I would be taking liberties with that story. It wouldn't be exactly what really happened. So if that happens, I do try to, change things so it's not so obvious as to exactly who it is. But then always in the author's note, because I know historical fiction readers really want to know what's fact, what's fiction. I always explain very clearly in the author's note kind of what really happened and where I took liberties. I think it's really important to do that. What I like to say is I kind of find a building, I do a lot of research, and then I use that as a non-fictional scaffolding, and if you will, and then layer fictional characters on top of that to make a story that will hopefully keep your attention, but also just, make people aware of that there was this bomber in New York City, which no one knew. Everyone I spoke to said I had no idea that that was going on, except for one person in an author talk I did a few weeks ago, who she said that she lived in Brooklyn at the time. And when they went to the movies, they would check to make sure the seats didn't have a cut in them, because that's what he'd do. He'd cut it with a knife and stick the pipe bomb inside of the actual seat. And she said, I remember going to movies and you check and make sure there's no slit in the seat, which is awful.
It is. I tell you, if I'd read this book before we went to the Rockette show, I may have checked the seats beside me too.
I think they have a very good safety system now. So
Right.
I think, okay.
One other question from a book club member was, they want to know, and I don't want to do any spoilers here, but they want to know why you killed off a character in the book, even though the bomber never did kill anybody, but injured quite a few people, I understand. And I understand from a writer's point of view why certain things are done, but I'll let you explain that.
Yeah, I knew the character of Marion needed a really big turning point to turn from, being involved in getting to be a Rockette and all the dance aspect of it, and really getting her into this more of a thriller, which is what takes up more of the second half of the book. And so I really need an inciting incident, which is what they call it, to get her doing that. And I hated to do it, but I did have to kill off a character in order to make that work. And, there's certain readers I love, like Kate Quinn, if anyone reads her, she's amazing. And in The Rose Code, she did something similar, even worse, I think, actually, in terms of who she chose to kill. But it was so effective, and it just stops you in your tracks. And then you just are, thrown into the story even more. And so I decided to go ahead and do that. And I know it's a little tough to read, but it worked for the story.
Sure. My first mystery I wrote was titled Matanzas Bay, and it's based in St. Augustine. And my character's a private eye, and he meets all kinds of characters during the book. And one of them plays a kind of a major role in the first half of the book. He's a cranky old character, and spoiler alert, I killed him off. And my wife was one of my first readers of the manuscript, and she just erupted. Why did you kill? I think I slept on the couch that night.
Oh no! Did you keep him killed off?
Oh yeah, he was.
You
dead.
did, yeah, yeah. It's like Elizabeth George, the English writer, and the Thomas Linley series, and he has this gorgeous wife, and a few books in, she gets her killed, which is brutal, but it works.
Well, if you remember Game of Thrones and George R.R. Martin, he delights in killing off who you think are the heroes of the book.
Yes, and it makes for very compelling watching.
Right, for sure. Here's another writerly question. Steve Berry, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he writes contemporary novels with deep historical roots. They're thrillers. Yeah. And I've known Steve for quite a while. He lived nearby for a while. And at one time I asked him a question, I think it was, what does it take to be a successful writer, an author? And he said, be careful what you wish for. He said, he publishes a book every single year. And in order to do that, he's working on 3 books at once. Mm-hmm. He's finishing a book, he's starting another book, and he's researching the one after that. He said you're on a perpetual motion machine. You just can't get off it. So I said, okay, Steve, I probably won't ever be a successful author, but thank you. But do you find the kind of pressure for every time you sit down to write another book, knowing that you've got thousands of people out there who loved your last books and they want a new book, but maybe more of the same? Is this give you pause as you sit down to write?
I think because my books kind of had a slow build. My first book was put out there, and then everyone was kind of surprised at how well it did. And then the second book did even better. And so it's been a very slow build. I early on, I decided, if anyone asked me to talk, I will go and talk. So I would go to Long Island and talk at libraries and, share my book with people. And so it was a very slow build of both kind of readership and getting noticed by bigger places like Good Morning America. and that kind of thing. And so that's been lovely because I never felt overwhelmed. It just felt like, oh, okay, here we'll do this now. And each book I do something different. So, you know, the Chelsea Girls is more of one timeline with two different points of view. And the book I'm working on now is just a little different in terms of structure. And so I never feel like I have to write the same book over and over because I have my choice of, you know, the time period, the building, the characters. Each book is brand new, and each one is just a kind of a completely different project from the other. But I love Steve Berry. And in fact, speaking of him, we have a very good friend in common, MJ Rose, who's another author.
Right.
And when she and I were stuck at an airport together after a book talk, we came up with an idea to put together short stories all around a suffragette parade in New York City in 1915, a part of the celebration of the anniversary of women's right to vote. And Steve Berry was one of the writers who included a short story in it. It's called Stories from Suffragette City. And he has a great story that's exactly, you know, what he writes. It's thrilling. It's really based in the history. And the other authors included Chris Bojalian, Paula McLean. It just was so much fun to do. And so that's really, you know, how I've never met him in person, but I feel very fond of him because he was so helpful with that.
He was instrumental in the Thriller Writers Association, both he and his wife Elizabeth, and I think Elizabeth is in business with MJ. They have
Yes.
I can't remember the name of the little company, but may not be little anymore. But
No, I think they're doing very well. Yeah, it's really, I have to say, the book world, and you may have found this too, is very supportive. You know, I have a whole bunch of new friends who are women in their 40s and 50s who wrote books later, you know, after being lawyers or moms. And so we're all just so thrilled to be here and be part of the conversation that it's just a joy. You know, we all meet for dinner, we have a text chain going all the time, and that the author world is surprisingly supportive. And I think it's because unlike, say, nonfiction books, where if there's one published, you can't, you know, people won't read the other. With our books, if you like Kate Quinn, you might like mine. There's no competition, and readers love to read.
For sure, for sure. Do you do appearances at writing conferences, things like that?
I haven't done writing conferences. I've done a lot of kind of keynote speeches at libraries and foundations and that kind of thing, but I haven't done writing conferences yet. A number of festivals too, which is really fun.
Not to put you on the spot, but I'm involved with the Florida Writers Con, which is part of Florida Writers Association, and we have a big conference every year in the Orlando area. And I helped them get Lisa Black as our keynoter for this year. And they were asking me for somebody else. So I'll give them your name if you'd like to.
Sure. Goodness, I
Orlando
love
in
it.
October.
Oh, my goodness, of course.
Okay.
There's another friend of mine down there, Sarah Penner, who writes some historical fiction as well. And she's done a number of keynotes as well. She's just absolutely terrific. Yeah, it's a fun world.
Absolutely. And going back to the spectacular and the iconic buildings, you could write for another 100 years and not run out of iconic buildings in New York City. And you know, there's the Empire State Building, the Flatiron Building, the Chrysler Building, Lincoln Center, you name it. But I know you've already come up with one for your next novel. So tell us about that next novel.
Yeah, so the next novel is set at the Met Museum in the 1970s and the 1930s. And in the 1930s, it's in Egypt, actually, which required a trip to Egypt in April as part of my research, which was incredible. And so that's from the point of view of our associate curator at the Egypt collection at the Met, who she's a young woman in Egypt in the 30s, and later we're seeing her as an older woman in the 70s. And there's also, it's from the point of view of an assistant to the Met Gala, which at that point was under Deanna Vreeland, who was running it. And that's the party of the year that's, you know, all the fashionistas go to. And so these two very unlikely pairings, they have to team up to track down a missing artifact. And so, yeah, you know, it's still early days with it, but I like to say it's a mix of glamour and mummies, and we'll see where it goes.
Glamour and mummies.
Yeah.
I love that. That sounds like a Steve Berry book. Oh, I should mention a factoid. I'm a character in one of Steve's books.
Oh,
He used my name and I didn't know anything about it until another author friend called me. He said, "You're in Steve Berry's new book, The Warsaw Protocol." I said, "What?" So I had to get the book, and I was the henchman of the antagonist, and he killed me off fairly quickly.
oh, that is perfect. That
Yeah.
recently a library auctioned off to name a character in my book. And so a woman bought it and she wanted her mother's name to be in it. And so for the woman who runs the rehearsal club in my book, which is the boarding house where a lot of the Rockettes stayed in real life. Her name, Mitzi Fielding, I believe. I'm blanking on it at the moment, but it was the perfect 1950s name, right? Mitzi. I'm like, that's great, ideal. And she surprised her mom with the book and gave it to her to read, which was really funny. I see someone mentioned some authors, including my high school classmate April Smith, use recurring characters. Did you ever feel tempted to have a character appear in another book? So far they haven't crossed over, but I love that idea and I love it when other authors do that. So far buildings have crossed over in my books, but not characters, not yet.
That's something to keep in mind, though.
Yeah.
How did you come up with the title of the spectacular? There were some questions as we were talking about it at the book club, whether it referred to the building. Did it refer to the Rockettes? Did it refer to Marion's journey, perhaps? Maybe all of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's what we try to do. It's a real team effort to title the books because we want it to reflect both the plot and the building in some way. So the masterpiece at Grand Central, it also refers to the fact that there was this huge art school in Grand Central Terminal for 20 years. And so the masterpiece is talking about Grand Central as a landmark that was about to be destroyed in the 70s. Is it a masterpiece? Is it not? And so we like having that kind of resonance. And usually it's a team effort of myself, my agent, and my editor. I'm really bad at names. I did name the Magnolia Palace. I'm very proud of that one. But in general, they tend to pick them, and my editor picked the spectacular, which we thought, oh yeah, that's perfect. Because again, it has that resonance with more than one thing.
I'm always interested in what kind of books influence a writer. Are there any authors or books that come to mind that really stuck in your mind?
Yeah, Edith Wharton I loved. Agatha Christie growing up, I loved. My favorite childhood book was The Secret Garden. I love that idea of transformation and something hidden. I love Hernan Diaz, who wrote Trust most recently, that won the Pulitzer Prize, which is a wonderful Gilded Age story, a beautiful approach to telling a story. Kate Quinn, Beatrice Williams, those are really my favorites, I would say. And also Sarah Waters, who's an English author who knows how to do a great plot twist.
What are you reading now?
I just finished a wonderful book called A Most Agreeable Murder by a woman named Julia Seals, Seales. It just came out, and it is kind of this generous spoof on Agatha Christie and Jane Austen. And so if you loved, Persuasion or Sense and Sensibility, it is so much fun to read because you have this feisty heroine, but then she just takes it and you will be laughing out loud at every page. And it's kind of a closed door mystery. And it just is all the things that you love heightened about those two authors. It's just terrific and very clever.
What does Fiona Davis do for fun?
I have a house just north of the city. I'm here in New York City, but I have a house just north. So, I've got the vegetable garden and the hammock, which is a great place to sit and read a book. And I'm also very active. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2020. And so I'm very active with the Michael J. Fox Foundation and doing what I can about Parkinson's awareness. And that, of course, is, if you've read the book, it's sprinkled very lightly in there. And that was something I thought as I was working on it would be interesting, because if you're a dancer, you're known for having full control of your body. And what is the worst thing that could happen? And so that's where I decided, let's see if we can kind of meld things here. And I'm very lucky in that it's very well controlled with medication at the moment. It's, I'm doing really well. But I just noticed that people who had it, they would tell me, they'd whisper it to me because they don't want anyone else to know. They were worried they'd seem old, or they worried they'd lose their job, which is absolutely, something to worry about for sure. And it just started me thinking about how Parkinson's is a little bit like breast cancer was 30 or 40 years ago, where no one spoke of it. You did not speak of it. And, now, of course, they have so much power because people are speaking up, and there's research and there's funding. And I feel like with Parkinson's, that's a similar thing that I want to kind of fight for and stand up and say, yep, this is what it looks like. I'm doing fine, and let's try and figure out a cure, which of course the Michael J. Fox Foundation and a number of other foundations are doing a great job at figuring that out.
The documentary on Michael J. Fox still was just amazing.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, it really was. It was inspiring. It was difficult to watch. It was funny. He's just an incredible person.
It really is. Any more questions y'all can put into the chat room at any time? We still have 7 minutes, folks.
I think we've covered what novels are you currently reading? We've
Yeah,
covered,
we
so
did
we got that. Yeah.
When will the book on the Met be out?
That will be out in probably January of 2025. I'm about a year and a half in between books right now, which works out in terms of going out and talking about the books and staying home and writing. So that will be, I think January 2025.
When will your publisher put it up for pre-orders?
Oh, they like to do that so early. And I just apologize to all the readers because they want us to start, hyping them up the minute they put them available for pre-order, which is about 6 months out from the pub date these days. And so I remember I posted something on Facebook like, oh, the next book comes out in 3 months. And someone wrote, hasn't it been out already? Because it feels like it's all we're talking about. But pre-orders are so important in terms of, hitting the New York Times list and that kind of thing, that I understand their concern.
I know a lot of people think once you write a book, goes out into the world, everybody's going to love it and buy it. But here's Miss Davis here speaking to us today. And how many of these interviews have you done so far?
Oh, for this book?
For this book.
Oh gosh, I'd say when it first came out, which was June 7th, the publisher very kindly sent me on a book tour. So that was doing about 2 talks a day for 2 weeks, a different state every day. And from there, I'm doing at least 1 or 2 talks per week. And some involve travel, but some are like this or virtual, which is just fantastic to be able to reach people all over.
Yeah. So it's really incumbent on the author to do so much of the marketing and to get the word out there and reach people and reach the readers. I'm an independently published author, and it's even harder to do because we don't have a big traditional house behind us. But I really admire everything that you've been doing.
And just on that note, it's so wonderful to see people who've written books and put them up and suddenly get picked up by a big publisher, because I think there is a way to do both and write a book well and get it known. I mean, it's hard, but I think the agents and the traditional publishers are much more aware that there's some great writing out there that doesn't come up through that normal funnel.
Right. Here's another one. I love these virtual sessions as I'm in Colorado. Okay. Or I wouldn't get to see you otherwise. That's great.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
This is like asking which of your children, if you had children, you like best. But are any of your books your favorites that you've written?
I love them all, and especially whatever one I'm working on at that time is definitely my favorite. It was really fun. The book set at the Dakota was really interesting because it was very hard to get in. You can't just walk up to the doorman and say, hey, I'm writing a book, can I see inside? They do not allow that. And I knew I wanted to set a book there because it's so intriguing. It's like a castle on the edge of Central Park. And a friend of mine said, you know, it turns out that Lauren Bacall's apartment was on the market for $23 million at that time. It was an estate sale. She'd been passed away for a few years. And so she got us an appointment, and I, you know, put on my most fabulous outfit, and we got this tour of Lauren Bacall's apartment, which was all the original detail, you know, the original moldings, the fireplaces. It was just beautiful. And I remember, you know, being led around and trying to memorize every detail and asking if there was a gym or parking. And I did not take that apartment. But later I did get to know a couple people who live in the building and got a full tour from the basement up to the, you know, the top floor where the maids used to live. And that was really an incredible thing because, you know, Grand Central, you can get in anytime and wander around, but the Dakota was really like a castle that I had to breach. It was, and it's so interesting. The history of it was so much fun to work on.
So you didn't put a down payment on that apartment?
No.
Stephanie asks, do you have a favorite character of all the novels you've written, and do you prefer dual timelines over single timelines?
Oh, great questions. You know, I'm in the Dollhouse, there's a character named Darby, who is a bit of a misfit. She comes from out of town to go to secretarial school, Katie Gibbs, in the 50s, and she gets put at the Barbizon Hotel on the same floor as the Ford models. And so she's a real fish out of water. And I was, you know, she was a really fun character to write. And in terms of dual timeline versus single, a single is easier to write, but dual timelines are really challenging and fun. And I love reading them. So I'm, you know, kind of going back and forth. The next one will be more of a dual timeline. But it's interesting because some readers love them and some hate them. And so I'm kind of going back and forth and seeing what works for each story.
Here's a good question from Lisa. I know Steve Berry does this. He has trips where he takes people to the various sites, and most of them are overseas somewhere. And Lisa wants to know, she'd like to go to New York and see all these places. And if a travel agent ever has contacted you about doing a Fiona Davis tour.
Yeah, you know, I have not been contacted, but, you know, early on of my first book, there was a Boston book club called Club Red, R-E-D, which stands for Read, Eat, Drink. And they said, you know, we want to come down and get a tour of the places that you used in the Dollhouse. And they showed up on this huge bus, and there were, you know, 30 of them. And we spent the day going around the city and, you know, looking at some of the sites and having lunch. And they've done that ever since for every book. And so they're coming down in early December to do the Christmas Spectacular and the backstage tour, and we'll have lunch at Sardi's. And so, you know, that's kind of what I've been doing so far, but we'll see what happens. There's been more demand for it. And I think, you know, there's so much in the books that is part of New York because I love finding those hidden places and bringing them to life. And so it could be really fun. I think it's a great idea.
I think so too. I'll sign up for it. Well, folks, we've run through another hour here, and I want to thank Fiona. Thank you so much for giving of your time. This has been enlightening. It's been entertaining. We really appreciate it. Let's give her a big hand here, folks.
Thank you, Vic. And thank you. There's marvelous questions, and it was just a delight to speak with you. The hour flew by.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for participating. Fiona, we wish you all the best with the new book on the Met Museum and as you're moving forward on your writing journey. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.